Welcome. Everybody is in. And hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Let me just end the show. How's everybody doing today? How long has it been since we've seen each other?
24 hours.
Yep.
Time flies when you're having fun. So he just sent me a note saying, is this where I come? And the answer is yes. I see his chair, but I don't see him. So we'll wait for Nick to join us, and then we can talk about all things. By the way, my green screen is definitely not cooperating, because there is actually green in this blue shirt. Talk about schoolboy errors. But fortunately, the green screen worked on StreamYard, but when I actually go here and I click on green screen, look at what happens. So it does not want to play. So I'm going to just keep it like that. So let me just get hold of him and tell him that we're here. Oh, there he is. I'll bring him on now. Let me just tell him the link, bit.ly. He is there, so that's the good news. CoronaTV after show. There we go. I'm guessing that's him. Yes, it is. Seth Sparks, let me tell you, I feel like I completely butchered your poetic description of harmony. So you may have to reframe it or restate it for Nick, because it's interesting how it's come back. And then Tom was reframing your restatement of the reframe of the video response to my rebuttal, if you know what I mean.
I think you did well. The horse is down. We can let it be for a while.
I just want to say to Nick, welcome to this after show. I loved everything you said on the show. I'm trying to figure out if there's any way I can adopt you as a younger brother. If I could, I'd really like to, because not only did you have some great ideas today that came across, but just your personal sensibility. And even though I've never been to a Star Trek convention, my son took me twice to the San Diego Comic-Con. And we actually launched a book together, a book called Superheroes in Philosophy I did with my son. We launched it at Comic-Con. And it was the most amazing thing, because we had in our book some prominent superhero writers and artists. And so tons of people came to hear our panel discussion. It was just overwhelming. You know, we were only two of the guys there who weren't in costume. So it was pretty interesting.
Well, yeah, you must have stood out in a different way, being the only ones there not in costume. Yeah, I have two Star Trek uniforms. My wife is quick to remind me that they're costumes, but got to respect the uniform.
I like that a lot.
So now I was the question I was going to ask you, but before I do, I'm going to let Tom have the floor for one more moment to show us if he took any notes today. But before you do that, do that.
Joseph is so quick to mute me. When he asks me, he gives me the floor. It's like I'm stunned. I don't know what to do. These are, Nick, I take notes, and when I get excited, you see red, you see yellow, you see all the way down the page, red and yellow today. So there was a lot to get excited about, a lot about planting the flag, and a lot about that branding as an art, not just a science, and that those concepts around coherence and alignment, and also what you said about the McDonald's flexibility within a framework. I did a couple books, one called True Success and one called The Art of Achievement years ago, where I talked about flexible firmness. And it's interesting, our word consistency, everybody gets it wrong. You know, the font's got to all be the same, everything's got to be, no. From the Latin, it means to stand together. Sto, stare, steti, a verb that means to stand, and con, a particle that means together, to stand together. Do our actions stand together? Do our words and actions stand together? Do our promises and results stand together? It's all about, do the people here stand together? Consistency as an ancient concept is more like that of harmony than it is what people think of today as just repetitive behavior. Everything's uniform. Everything's exactly the same as everything else. No, that's not the ancient concept at all. And so at the bottom of philosophies, both Greek and Roman in the West and Chinese and Indian in the East, is this really cogent concept of harmony, that kind of alignment or cohesion that I think brands could rediscover to their great benefit, because it has to do with internal harmony as well as harmony facing the customer, harmony at all levels of an organization. It's a very powerful concept.
It is. I hadn't really thought about it until today. I feel like I would need to learn more about music and the role of harmony to be able to spell that out.
And well, one thing, you mentioned music, it's never static. It's always dynamic. And that was Seth's great realization a few days ago, and he posted a video about this kind of a resonance. You hit a tuning fork, and it's vibrating, and you put it next to another tuning fork that's properly aligned, and it begins to vibrate as well. And there's a kind of a thing sociologists call social tuning. It's why we're told in all ancient literature to be careful the friends we have, be careful the associates we have, because we become like the people we're around. And that stuff on, you become your 5 closest friends is not just crazy stuff. It's based in really serious social science. And there is this resonance, this harmonious resonance that's really interesting to think about.
I think that this is a really, really powerful concept. Cohesiveness versus consistency, and then even parlaying harmony on it, and it absolutely applies to this challenging time that we're going through here in the US, and acceptance in terms of accepting people that are different from you or think differently to you, but recognizing at the end of the day that we have more in common, or we have so much in common that would feed into that harmony. I was even thinking, without getting political at all, I was even thinking about, as a South African, when I meet a fellow South African, at a conference or on my travels, immediately that harmonic tuning fork comes into play. Our accents will change. We'll aggressively pursue the commonality. And at that point, it doesn't matter at all where we live in the US, who we voted for, where we work, how much money we make. But okay, there's a strong cultural component to that, no doubt. But I think it is this idea of recognizing, the cohesiveness and the consistency. One is horizontal, one is vertical, and it's the point at which they intersect where some interesting magic happens. But it's like a slide rule, right? The slide rule, it's not a plus. It's not it's not like that. It's constantly moving up and down and finding different points of intersection and connection.
Well, Joseph, also right before the show, I put on new strings for this thing, a purple Fender Telecaster. I put on a new set of strings. The interesting thing about strings on an electric guitar, they're made out of the same material, but they're all different. They're all different sizes, and you play on them, if you play well, all different notes. But the harmony that results is what makes the music powerful. So it's that diversity and that harmony within diversity. Very little sameness happens with the playing of a musical instrument, very little of sameness, but it's the dynamic harmony that results from the differences that gives you the power. And that's something we as a nation need to understand. That's something businesses need to understand, where the silos fight each other and members of the C-suite undermine each other. It's that harmony in difference that's the source of the power. So I'm gonna put up my purple Telecaster.
What do you think about that, Nick?
I think I think it's true. I think the politics of it are hard because I feel like, I mean, that's kind of its own offshoot of a conversation, because I do think there's more that we have in common. But I think what we're finding after this whole thing that we've been through is like, except the one little thing seems to be a pretty big thing in terms of, you know, the separation, the fracture, whatever it is there. So
it's hard. It's hard to play the guitar. See, that's the thing that people don't understand. You don't just, harmony doesn't just happen, right?
Yeah.
I've been playing guitar since I was 12 years old, and there's still things I'm learning to do. I'm 68, for crying out loud. There's still things I'm learning to do, and people don't understand political harmony. It's hard. I mean, you talk about the making of the Declaration of Independence, a little bit like your spam example. It was like making spam, or the famous making sausage example, right? It wasn't easy at all. We have to fight hard for it, but fight in the right way. We're fighting in all the wrong ways right now.
We don't have a Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan problem anymore, right? I mean, that was kind of the thing. If you even look what Congress did back then, is they all gathered in DC together. They lived there, they worked there, they talked to each other, and even though they had political divides, they were buddies.
Yeah.
So like, I have friends from Minnesota, as I mentioned. I went to the spam museum, and I immediately liked you for that reason, because you're in Iowa, you're there. My little brother grew up in Cedar Rapids after school. I like Iowans, they're great people, lots of farms. My grandpa was a farmer. So there's all that like connectivity. And I have a lot of friends back in Minnesota that are Trumpers. I have a lot of friends from high school up north here from San Francisco that are Trumpers. And so I love them. And we do engage in dialogue. And any of my friends who've been on my feed see that. But there is a huge thing that you said, Nick, is that if there's something completely different than having a disagreement between Mitt Romney and Donald Trump, right? So if you're talking about a Republican who, you know, doesn't do all the awful things that our president has done over the last 4 years, it's very easy to get in line and have some harmony with your political allies. But it's much more difficult when, even today, when they talk about harmony and being kind and empathetic, we have a president who is lashing out and refusing to accept election results and spewing lies on Twitter that are being debunked immediately. I mean, those kind of things are very difficult for us. And I don't see any immediate harmony as a culture. I think that things are going to have to heal. I think that justice heals. And I think there's going to be justice, swift justice against Mr. Trump. I have a lot of buddies in the law community at the SDNY in New York. And what he's up against is real. And I think that justice will heal us as a group, because people will actually see who he was and what he did. And they'll see what the GOP has done in supporting him over the last 4 years. It's not that you have to hate the people that love Trump. It's that you have to understand that they are human, and then you can hug them, but you still have to understand that there is a disconnect there. To your point, it's not something you're going to get your arms around. I can't. I love my family and friends that love Trump, but I can't understand it. I just can't.
Well, I think, you know, it kind of gets back to some of our talk earlier about directionality too, because I think you talk about the Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill. I think we're so dug in on some things that it challenges the discourse, and both on the right, but also on the left. I mean, I think we've got a lot of new voices who are new voices and are good voices, but I raise an eyebrow a little bit when we can't, when it's kind of the all or nothing. And I mean, I heard one point of view that I hadn't thought of with Joe Biden, of being someone from that era, and that's sometimes used against him. But if you've got someone that is known for at least being able to maybe have some of the discourse, maybe that's possible.
No, I agree. And I believe me, I think there's a lot of woke people that need to get some sleep. I hear you.
Well, it's interesting. We talked about context a little bit, and even presidential brands. And I think honestly, I'm not sure if there was this is intended to be a relatively lighthearted way of looking at this, but I'm not sure there's anything better that you could have had designed to help with the George W. Bush brand than Donald Trump. I think it was
very true.
One of my heroes on the front of writing about history, John Meacham, who said that George W. Bush, in contrast, is increasingly looking like a Roman senator. And I actually, about a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago, I've read lots of books about different presidents and read Meacham's book about George H.W. Bush. And I was amazed at how much I liked the book. And, someone that, that I remember being president, but just really, I think that's why I'm a good fit for biographies. I just enjoy spending time with certain people. And that was someone that I really, even politics aside, I just like this person and their family and kind of.
I think Occam's law, right, which is the simplest solution is often the correct one. That was the question I was going to ask you, right, which is based on the people you saw on the ground getting pizza, how many of them surprised you in office, or how many of them were something behind when the cameras weren't rolling versus when they were? But I was thinking, before you answer that, when you look at someone like George, first of all, let's hope that that somebody else doesn't come along that makes Donald Trump look like that that Roman senator.
Good point.
But you think about George W. Bush, and he was a man who wanted to be the commissioner. He wanted to own a baseball team. He wanted to be the commissioner of MLB commissioner. He was, the way Will Ferrell would portray him on SNL. I remember he was like the one line when he was like, you see, if you fool me once, then you're gonna fool me. But if you fool me, then ain't gonna be fooled again.
Yeah.
And that was the line. And it's so true, right? A fool man ain't gonna be fooled again. That's spoken like a Texan. It's like a Yogi Berrism. And for me, the moment that I will never forget, and as much as I hated him or felt that I hated him at the time, probably did, it was when he was giving that press conference, I think in Afghanistan, and this guy threw 2 shoes at him.
The shoe!
And he didn't, and he never blinked. He just somehow ducked, and he just kind of gave that little grin, and he carried on. And it's like, how can you hate that guy? It was just a moment.
The Will Ferrell thing, I think they gave him one word in a debate sketch or something, and he said strategery. But I bring that up because there is something unflappable or like leaning into the jokes, and I think that's what the current occupant can't even begin to get his head around, which we're seeing like right now. But the George W. Bush, the Presidential Library, George W. Bush Presidential Library has a podcast, and honest to goodness, the podcast is called The Strategist. So anybody that can take a joke lobbed at them and then use it,
right,
is a winner.
Well,
so
I think that's the beauty.
I had a graduate student. He was one of my teaching assistants long ago, who became a head of alumni at Yale and then became dean of admissions. But when he was head of alumni, he took me to show me the fireplace where George W. would heat up a hot branding iron and brand his fraternity brothers.
Oh, God.
Thought of as the most hilarious thing in the world. Now, George W. was carrying on the fraternity's tradition in doing this, but he was the first one to think it was hilarious. And my friend, the director of alumni, was telling me he was known as a prankster, as a person who had a huge sense of humor. Now, contrast that with the Trump persona, right?
Well, also, you look at the human nature of him, right? How he cuddled up with Michelle Obama as an example. I think was endearing. I did not like him while he was president. I was vocal about my dislike. I thought he was a puppet. I thought he was, you know, he wasn't overly intelligent, but I never disliked him. And what people did say constantly about him is that you want to have a beer with him. And I would say, yeah, I would. I would like to have a beer with him, or 10, because that's the kind of guy that I thought would be like, he would be fun. I never thought he was a, you know, a corrupted, damaged human being. And that's the difference. That's the biggest difference. He's a likable, also, lovable man.
You know what the thing is, and this is, and even though people might be watching this and not enjoying the politicization of CoronaTV, which, let's face it, has been political since episode 1, so I'll stop apologizing. There are bigger lessons here, and you have to transcend the personality. One is that the power of self-deprecation, of being able to not take life or to be able to laugh at yourself. It is one of the most cathartic and one of the most powerful tonics. The other one is George W. Bush rose to the occasion when he needed to. And I will never forget, just like the moment after, you know, 9/11, when he stood on that mound with that bullhorn and he said, and someone said, I can't hear you. And he said, well, guess what? The people that did this to us are going to be hearing from us soon, or hearing from me soon. And, you know, and that to me is still, you know, the anger sometimes that I have in me, and I've gone through all these mood swings as well, which is, you know, Nick, I always say that kind of CoronaTV it's manic depressive. It goes from the highs to the lows, from the ridiculous in Star Trek to serious topics. But my biggest anger and frustration is that COVID should have united this country. If we, you know, pretty much I'm convinced that second to an alien invasion, we would have politicized an alien invasion. And we would have put them in cages, or we would have lost their parent. We would have done something. But we could not unite over COVID. And that was the moment to rise to the occasion. And that is my biggest, you know, the thing that is why I struggle to let go of this and find peace and harmony and move on.
It's funny.
He would have won the election.
Yeah, I know. It's funny that
hands down,
as Nick is relating to and being not just a presidential historian, but probably a brand historian, that we're seeing that brands, in whatever form, when they don't concede their humanness, their frailties, their faults, it's a downfall. You know, and great brands come to a point where they go, we screwed up and we're going to fix this. And when you don't do that, when you try to paper over it or just move on like no one's paying attention, it adds up, you know, and eventually, no matter how large you are, it'll catch up to you.
Yeah. I think Mark Zuckerberg attempted that yesterday. I really do. I don't know if you guys know that, but, you know, Steve Bannon asked for the beheading of Dr. Fauci.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a real story. I didn't know.
No, it was a real story.
Wow.
It was a real story. And Mark, because he runs the company 100%, it's him, said that it did not violate Facebook's policies. So it doesn't, that's one thing that just blew me. I thought the stock was going to take a hit today, but that he proved himself there, to your point, Jan. He's not going to concede anything with his platform, anything to do with news, anything to do with fact checking. I mean, he's going to play it out, and that might hurt him, because if you actually call for the beheading of one of the greatest men in our culture today, and that's not a violation of your T&Cs, then you need to rewrite your T&Cs.
Yeah.
Leslie's point about Domino's is a good reminder of the brand parallel because I do think, you know, we're talking about conceding this race, but it's candor around something that didn't go your way. And I think the way they embrace that and it speaks to who they are, and they were able to build on that. And I think then you can thread that back to the presidency, and all those moments of great concessions are going viral. I love the George H.W. Bush note to Bill Clinton You know, Gore conceding and then rebuilding, rebranding. I mean, not really rebranding, focusing on an aspect that had always been part of the Al Gore brand of the environment. And really, I talk a lot about the metaphor of dimmer switches. And, you know, we're a lot of people at a lot of different times and in different aspects of our personality. I'm the brand guy who's a Star Trek fan. But he brought that environmentalism to his roles in government. And then once out of that, turned that dimmer switch of environmental activist way the heck up and to much acclaim.
Well, look what happened to Greta Thunberg. I mean, she went from being this kid to when she took on Trump mocking her, her brand strength went through the roof, and all of a sudden she wasn't a kid anymore. I mean, it really defined her as, you know, as more as an activist than almost her actions as an activist in a way.
I've written blog posts about both her and Dr. Fauci in terms of what they do with their personal communication and why we find them as magnetic as many of us do.
Yeah, and
what do you think the authentic? Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. For Gore, you went from being known as, you know, jokingly the man who invented the internet, you know, the internet information highway, to inconvenient truth, which is to me, you know, a much more powerful association. You know, and I don't know if he ever admitted that he really, you know, he wasn't the architect of the internet, but I think his strength also is his legacy will be tied more to something more powerful by being part of the inconvenient truth.
And I think it's in an inconvenient truth and at speaking events, he is known to introduce himself as I was the man who was formerly almost president of the United States or something like that. And you compare that with, again, I have no clue how any of this damn thing's going to go. But, you know, I saw CNN getting scolded for calling Trump the presumptive front runner for 2024. And it's like, how can we even talk about when he hasn't even conceded 2020? But I just imagine, just because he's nothing if not predictable, because I'm sure his version of that speech won't have any of the candor of Al Gore's like laugh line. It'll be like, I was screwed out of it was the most crooked, the most, you know, we heard this kind of thing. It's just awful. And I can't even deal with 2024.
Well, as I basically said, you know, in fact, one of the things that I saw on election night, someone was saying, "Are you enjoying the series finale of America?" I mean, it was just brilliantly written, that line, and you know, and I personally do not think we will see Trump in 2024, based on the ship that will have sailed, based on you know, based on his age, but
he'll be in jail, we hope, right?
Well, but I'm going to say just predict it, just trying to like project it out. I think it's going to be a flippin' done deal that you're going to see the launch of Trump TV, and we'll see the end of Fox. He'll basically steal he'll steal Tucker, he'll steal Hannity, he'll steal a couple of people that he can, if he can. And Fox will have been left in the cold.
So I have a question for you, Joe, and maybe others, because I just read today on Axios that Trump's advantage to his own network is that he has, you know, millions or tens of millions of names, email addresses, and phone numbers. But isn't that asset does that asset belong to him, or who paid to collect that? Wasn't that, you know, the GOP or the Republican Party, not Trump personally? I mean, I was wondering when I read, they go, how does he all of a sudden get access to all this data, doesn't pay for it?
I have an idea on that. And I think it's also in the many headlines of everything going on right now. It's why Don Jr. And his special lady friend are taking over the RNC, and why he's forming a political action committee. So all of a sudden he's creating his own structures and control systems in existing structures because any sort of media platform building is going to be, I mean, he's probably his biggest platform is his damn Twitter feed. But I think when you talk about lists and assets, I think those systems that he's putting control mechanisms in place are designed to do that. It's not to necessarily win all these races and do things.
That's a great point. I mean, thank you for saying that, because I was wondering how that would work. Then all of a sudden,
my guess.
And Paula, I mean, this whole, but I mean, I always try and bring it back to marketing, right? And I mean, this is just a classic example of CRM in play, and the Z of zealots and the R of retention. I'll just walk you through it just a little bit, just very, very briefly. So the Z of zealots, right, which is advocacy. The thing about Trump always was it was love and hate. You either loved him or hated him, and he played into that beautifully, the zealotry of like that extreme position. But he stood for something, as opposed to many brands that stand for nothing, right? The E of entrepreneurship, besides the platform he ran on as an entrepreneur, and the Celebrity and the Apprentice and the Celebrity Apprentice, which was, you could argue was part of a coordinated effort. But most importantly, the way that he disintermediated the entire media through Twitter. The R of retention is, and still, and always will be his base. Complete customer centricity like you've never seen. And then the O of owned asset was amidst all of that probably the strongest one, which is everything was Trump. When he gave a rally, his Trump jet was in the background. The amount of free media and earned media, and even the good, the bad, and the ugly. Stakes in university was the bad and the ugly, but everything else was just Trump, Trump, Trump. And the one thing I added was, at a time, I always say that when a celebrity, when a brand needs a celebrity to endorse it, it's because it's borrowed interest. They cannot stand on their own 2 feet, or they struggle to. And, with Hillary, it was Oprah, and it was Beyonce, and it was Gaga, and it was all these celebrities building their own personal brand, or at least, people flocking because of the celebrity, as opposed to for Trump, all he had was Ted Nugent and Kid Rock. So he had no one else but himself. And so what did he do? He was just front and center, and that became ZERO, and that became the case study, and the rest is history.
I think also the stasis that we're seeing, this inability to concede, I think that it's breaking his brain a little bit, because it does not align. I mean, he has built a personal brand that has almost overtaken, I think, his idea, his self-concept. I don't want to get into armchair psychology, but and I think because of that, this idea of I'm not saying this in the mean sense, but this idea of being a loser, of losing something, I think is incomprehensible to him. And I think that's why he's not dealing with it to a dangerous...
that concept has taken on a toxicity, a poisonous nature, such that it can't be, in an age where all the tech companies are having people give talks about the joy of failure, the benefits of failure. Here are the 12 ways I failed in my life. And people trying to embrace, right? Yeah, I lost. I made these 3 bets that are where I lost really big, and here's what I learned from them. In a culture where that's going on, you get this toxic masculinity and this toxic sense of winning and losing connected to that backs a person into a corner where there's no graceful way forward in a situation like the one he faces now. And I hope there's some people out there taking the lesson.
Well, and it's interesting.
It's what his niece Mary, that's the biggest takeaway from her book, is he can't lose. That is not part of his, his
Well, that was Fred, right? I mean, Fred, his biggest hero in the world, taught him that there are losers and there are winners. And if you're a loser, you're always a loser. Right. And so when we were talking about him running in 2024, Mary Trump was also interviewed, who is a clinical psychologist, who does understand the neuroses of her uncle because she wanted to study her family. I mean, that's typical, right? In the sense of a lot of therapists go to self-diagnose or to figure out how they grew up in this really dysfunctional family. Donald Trump can't lose. That's why when he's had all these bankruptcies, he says it's not his fault. He won't run again in 2024, according to Mary, because he can't fathom losing again. He hasn't even absorbed this loss, much less attempt to lose again in 2024. He's too damaged.
Well, I think what Nick said is interesting, because the whole concept of what his brand meant and represented and how it's evolved and how it's almost kind of left him behind. It's almost bigger than him. But I don't. I mean, I don't. I think it's documented that he never expected to win 4 years ago.
Yes.
But one thing I'll say is I'm not sure that it's not that I disagree with you, but I think right now everything is just feeding a narrative right now, which is I didn't lose. It was stolen from me. And why that's important is because, again, I think the Trump has always been about money. And the only thing you can pretty much do at this point is the media, is the network, is a media play. But he needs the outrage. He needs the injustice. He needs to
be the one thrown out, done wrong to, so he can. Yeah.
Well,
I think it's a con. It's yet another con, and everyone and people
Joseph,
are being played
when
again.
you say he didn't expect to win 4 years ago, I think we need to put an asterisk by that. He expected to win the game he was playing, which wasn't necessarily the game of becoming president. It was just the game of elevating his status and notoriety and fame. He expected to win that game. He knew he was going to win that game. And so if he didn't get the presidency, it was like, oh, I was just using this to get something else.
And he doesn't want his 70 million customers to feel like losers.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Well, he also thought that the reason, and again, same reason he went into this for his brand, was so he could start a television network.
Yeah.
That was the idea behind it in the beginning, was that he wants to be front and center king. And king of media, he was cool with that too. He didn't want the responsibility.
I want to introduce one more thought, which is we've spoken about, so much on the show, humility, and today's self-deprecation. Yesterday with Kevin Ryan, this idea that what society perceives as a weakness, in fact, is a strength. And also society has, we have very perverted ways of saying, you're a man, you don't cry, you're strong, you're this, you're that, etc. It's interesting to me how psychologically what is in play here, which is how few people, I'm talking about from a consumer to a voter. I love how Jan refers to customers, because from that lens, it makes sense. But how few people have been able to just say, you know what? I think I made a mistake. I think I got duped, or I'm out, or it's time to, again, from a loyalty standpoint, I'm going to go choose a different brand this time. The amount, the old saying that says, when digging oneself into a hole, the best thing to do is to stop digging. And I'm just blown away, even on Facebook conversations. These people that support him are just digging deeper, standing firmer, and they will not admit that they might. And to me, that's the most fascinating part here. It's just, at what point do you pull the plug and say, you know what, enough? That's the scary part.
It also shows that there is a lot more. Maybe we don't give Biden and his team enough credit for the strategy, the brand position that they chose. The reason that a Democrat or a Republican would move toward the left a little bit and away from their pocketbook can only be soul. Short of using the word love, there was a feeling of, and a conversation out there of, are you telling me that preserving your money and your taxes is worth your soul?
Right.
And I think Biden is underrated for using that word.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, there's also the fact that if your whole world view collapses, and that happens to a lot. That's a lot of the discussions I have with my friends. Is that it's not just that they could say, okay, I made a mistake, I don't like Trump anymore. They have a banner on their truck They have a flag. All of their friends, all of my high school friends that I hung out with, many of them still hang out together in the same small town. They can't unplug because if they do, they unplug from the tribe. And that's just part of your own primal fear of being disconnected from your tribe. So there's a lot of
part of and it's all part of the brand ethos too. It is not a brand that, and I, again, I feel like it's going to sound insulting, and I feel like this is a group of people that also feels very insulted too. So it's almost, you get stuck in this shame loop, but it's not an ethos that says, let's consider that, oh, we got something wrong. It is, I was going to say, when we're using the word winners and losers a lot, and that's not how most of us talk most of the time, but we're also, these are the labels. A strong brand has its own lexicon, and his is this continuum, a very simple continuum with a very clear line of winners and losers. And it's why he's been talking, you're going to get so tired of the winning, and everybody who's done something bad is a big loser. And so, it's these two things, and he can't, like you said, he can't be that. So that's why it has to be stolen. And I was just thinking of the language, the linguistics of all of this. And that's even why, even though these battles, it's like you don't have a case, everybody smart says, but he has to have exhausted them and have them thrown out. He can't give them up, because then it gets in the way of, I had this stolen from me.
Can you imagine losing?
Can I just say, one of the guys that kind of, I feel, annoys me to no end on Facebook wrote this, you just inherited $10 million. Biden becomes president. Describe your new life. Now, clearly he's doing that just because he's going to just be trolling people with respect to taxes and everything, right? So I just want to tell you what I wrote. So this is what I wrote. I said, I donate. What do you do, right? Describe my life. I said, I donate 10% to charity. I pay down my mortgage. I give money to my immediate family. I buy a bottle of Yamazaki 18-year, and I pay my taxes. So his response was, so you have about $1.95 left. And I said, yeah, but I got a bottle of amazing Japanese whiskey, gave money to charity, paid down my mortgage, and supported my family. I'm a big winner. You know what? I'm going to use the remaining money to buy a Powerball ticket. Can you loan me a nickel?
Well, and you know, it's funny because I guess I would see that, and I would have probably posted something, and someone I saw posted the other side of that, which was a series of photos. And I'm sitting here in my office that has a popcorn ceiling. And it was a picture of one of a popcorn ceiling, and it said, if your ceiling looks like this, Joe Biden's tax plan isn't going to interfere with you. If you keep a plastic bag full of other plastic bags under the sink, Joe Biden's tax plan isn't going. And they had about a dozen of them.
Well, that's a relief to hear.
Yeah, I do. I got that. Doesn't everyone do that?
Not.
Well, popcorn ceilings are definitely Midwestern.
Yeah, it's. I'm just living with it, because to do anything else would be a big mess.
It is.
Well, wonderful people in Corona land. We are gonna wind it down. Nick, I thoroughly enjoyed the day. I loved the little bit on spam, on Star Trek. There was just so much, especially my not so subtle segue of meat. I should have said meat ? Into spam.
It's a meat product.
It's meaty. It's meatish. It's meatish.
Meat adjacent.
It's meat adjacent. Do you know, by the way, Hormel, or I don't know if they did this, but when about a year ago, they announced that they were going to start going into meatless, into plant-based.
Really?
But I'm not really sure if that would have been a good idea. That's kind of like the Porsche coming out with an SUV. You know, some brands are just not meant to be diluted.
That's funny.
All right, my friends, have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Nick, for a great show and a great time in the after